So Mary Mannix is the head
Maryland Manager.
Maryland Rune Manager, which was surely chosen purely for the alliteration.
It was, and I got to choose the title myself.
You need to add marvelous Maryland.
I should.
So she is our friend from across the river and is the last speaker in our ongoing series, hopefully, that we will continue, of inviting our colleagues from our neighboring institutions to come and tell us about what is available at their repositories and also the connections that we all have. Because Hannah, who invited Mary to speak, my colleague who is the library genealogy associate, and I were having a conversation one day, and we realized we had this amazing epiphany that records don't end at bodies of water. So in fact, people from Loudoun County sometimes went to Maryland, and sometimes they came from Maryland, and sometimes they crossed back and forth across the river every day. As we have records in our collection that show, and I know Mary is going to tell us about some that surely do the same. We also share many researchers and also many resources, I think, probably are reflected across the river. So I encourage you to listen to Mary and hear what she has to say. But I'm going to let her get started and stop rambling. So enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I've waited years to be invited out here to Balch. I've been here 2 other times before, once for Archives Week or whatever it was, and once time many years back to hear the great departed George Lewis speak here, which was, I don't know how many years ago, but it was a long time ago. Throughout my career, I've always had patrons who are like, well, you know, the Balch does this, and the Balch has that, and the Balch has their own building. I know. So I've always been a little jealous of the Balch because you got your own building and you have more staff, but we all serve a role in the research community. I'm delighted to be here today. As hopefully, I know I have people I assume are some friends in my audience, and hopefully you will continue to be my friend before the end of this. Just to let you know, my PowerPoint exploded about an hour ago, so I'm not sure what's on here. Okay, so and then it wouldn't save to anything, and then finally it did save. It wouldn't even upload. So that's my excuse for whatever may or may not occur, but I can rattle on at great lengths. I have been at Burr Artz Public Library for nearly 30 years, so I kind of know the collection, though I don't know it as well as I used to because my brain isn't quite as sharp as it once was, or there's too much stuff in my head is how I prefer to think about it. So we're going to be talking today about the FCPL Maryland crossing the river to research. Actually, last night I was looking for a beautiful photograph of the bridge crossing the Potomac, but instead I found this young man whose name escapes me right now, but was a carpenter from Brunswick who died relatively young. And I thought this was kind of a cool, we could make believe he's getting ready to cross the river to do research. And again, we are the Maryland. I gave you my 3 handouts. That's kind of an older version, but this is our rack card, which you now have. It will be redone shortly. So this is like a limited edition. So treasure it greatly. And then I will admit that also I am the president right now of Frederick County Landmarks Foundation. So you also have 2 rack cards relating to events coming up from landmarks. It's not just that I'm president. The Maryland also owns the official records of Barnstormers, which is one of the yearly fundraisers for Frederick County Landmarks Foundation, which is a yearly tour of barns in different parts of Frederick County. Next year will be our 20th year. If you're able to come out this year, we're going to be in Adamstown, which was the land of Carrollton, which Charles Carroll of Carrollton, and I know some of you are Virginians, so you may not know this. He is our most famous signer of the Declaration of Independence for Maryland, and the one who lived longest, and the longest living signer to begin with, and the Catholic signer. So he did not live out there. He made money out there. He lived in Howard County, which is 2 counties over from Frederick. So it's not just that I'm president of Landmarks, it's also we do have some buy-in to that. And then in the coming year as Landmarks...
People will feel very at home there because it's the home of the new data center.
Yes, yeah, and you got lots of them out here, right? Right, exactly. So, and we're hoping that maybe it'll be the last home of a data center in Frederick County. But you know, who knows? That's another reason we're doing it down there. It was originally because of the connection to the, you know, the big United States anniversary, but also because it is Carrollton. But right now, whether or not we, as an organization, Landmarks or the Maryland as a government employee, I can't have an opinion on anything, necessarily relates to the appropriateness of putting data centers in the midst of what was once farmland. whatever. But it is a changing landscape. And that's part of what Barnstormers does, is really to bring people, not just people from Maryland or from Frederick County, but from across the river into Maryland, so you can see our changing landscape, because Adamstown is going to look much different, well, in 2 months. It looks even much different now, but it certainly will look different as time goes on. And as Landmarks heads into the 20th anniversary of Barnstormers, we're having 2 special exhibit events in Frederick County. And in a year and a half, we will have a definitive book on the history of Barnstormers, and also the definitive history of agricultural vernacular architecture, agriculture in Frederick County through the eyes of the barns of Barnstormers. So that's why you've got those 3 rack cards. I'll be thankful. 5 years ago, I would have also brought in like 15 pages of handouts for you. So I'm kind of gearing back from that. But welcome. We're going to be talking about the Maryland Room. And the Maryland Room is Frederick County Public Libraries, Center for Local History, Genealogy, and also government documents. By government documents, we don't necessarily mean the Declaration of Independence, but those items that were published by some by the state, some by local municipalities, some by the county, some also regional things. It's not for those of you who spend a lot of time in libraries, it's not technically a governmental repository, but we do collect those as well. We collect very broadly for the history of our area, because history started about 5 minutes ago, and people are going to be coming to research hopefully for years to come. So we're not just necessarily collecting things that relate to the 18th or 19th century. I am an archivist. We do function as an archives, which means people must sign in when they come into the room, put their personal possessions away in a locker, only use a pencil while they're in the room. That's all just as confidential as anyone's library card record will be. Even though we have both archival material and books, which aren't necessarily archival material, though we like to consider every book in our room a rare book, we do act as if everything is that way because our space is small. While our space is small, this was the Maryland at the time that I was hired. I was hired to create the Maryland Room. I'm the first person to hold this position, which is why I got to make my own title. In the room, and I'm sorry, at the time I didn't take photographs of the room when it was still had books in it. This is when we were getting ready to expand the Burr Artz Library. And it was probably actually about a third of the space here. And that's being generous. So this is when they were taking everything down. This was in our temporary quarters out at the Francis Scott Key Mall. We had more space than anybody else in the building. Well, I should rephrase that. We were the only department that got additional space. So if that's additional space, you can imagine what the earlier Maryland Room was like. And then, the new Burr Artz Library opened. And as my former director said, the Maryland Room was created in order to, or developed, it had been created several years back, but was developed in order to be the jewel in the crown of the new Burr Artz Library. If you're looking at the screen to the right, used to also be our Business Resource Center, but that was closed down and we expanded into that. I like to say we didn't kill the BRC, but we did pick its bones after it died. So we got that extra space as well. And in our world, you never have enough space, you know. We're always moving things around. That's our excuse for when things don't always look as tidy as perhaps they should, because it's a constant game. It's kind of like, the fall of Saigon. We're constantly moving things around in order to make better use of our space. If you haven't been to beautiful downtown Frederick, we are located along Carroll Creek, which years ago used to be a sewer pretty much, with lots of tanneries and other industrial entities along the line. After a flood in the mid-20th century, it has been developed into the Carroll Creek project. It no longer floods. Now all the flooding occurs at Baker Park, which is kind of our version of Central Park, but much, 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 much smaller. But there we are located. So again, if you know downtown Frederick at all, we are a block east of what we call the Square Corner, which is the intersection of Market and Patrick, would be the heart of downtown, and half a block away from the post office. So there we are. And this is from the creek view. This is from the front view, and we are conveniently located with a large parking deck right next to us. You get 2 free hours. After that, you are going to have to pay. But here we are, and we are located at the furthest reaches of the building. Although I was hired to develop the Maryland Room, I was hired after it was potentially designed. So I'm not saying that all of my patrons, by any stretch of the imagination, are people such as myself who have a harder time walking just because life has been cruel at times. But I'm at the furthest reaches of the building. If they had thought it through, perhaps we should have been closer to the front door, but we weren't. So once you make your way to Burr Artz, you have to go to the very, very end to see us. And you probably saw in that other image, we do have a big sign that says Maryland Room. And we are the Maryland Room. That's one of the most important things to remember about us. We collect for the entire state, okay? And we have, this is obviously not Maryland, but we do collect for the entire state. And again, all aspects of Maryland history and culture. This is in regards to secondary sources, not primary sources. So we collect books on any aspect of Maryland history and culture, and on any of the counties, municipalities of Maryland. We obviously put greater emphasis on historic Frederick County, which is Frederick County at the time of its formation, which I have a slide showing that here because I know you all on this side of the river may not know these sorts of details. This is just showing you when we first opened, the number of researchers we got. The researchers have dropped over the years in large part because many more things are available online. And also whenever you open a new facility, as my former director would say, your numbers go up, then they come down, and then they kind of equalize. The thing that I really find exciting about this is it shows the migration pattern in and out of Frederick County. Years ago, again, probably 20 years ago now, actually more than 20 years ago, looking at that date down there, every department used to do a little presentation about what we do. And I had a volunteer go through our sign-in sheets, our emails, our obituary requests, and then plot them all out on a map. And getting very kind of librarian geeky with that, and when she started laying it out, I was like, oh my God, it's the migration pattern. So you can see people coming out of Maryland, going down the Appalachians, going to Virginia, continuing down the Appalachians, and then some of them jumping over to California. We are, just like the Balches, we are a destination library, which means people come just to Frederick to see us, which also means that we bring money into the community. Not that it's all about cash, but we do bring money into the community. So while we do not have thousands upon thousands of researchers every year, we do have some researchers every year who come from outside. And outside also could just be from over here, so they come to town, they have to pay to park. Sometimes they want to eat lunch. Sometimes they bring someone with them who could care less about their research and so goes antiquing or goes to the bookstore or goes to another museum or goes to a battlefield. So again, we bring money into the community. I haven't mentioned that we are a non-circulating collection, which means all of our materials just stay right there. We are a complete reference collection, in large part for the preservation of these materials, but also because we are a destination library. If we have someone check out the one book we have on St. Mary's County snakes and someone comes in looking for that book, well, then we're really in a bad situation. So again, we keep everything right in the room. We are reference only. Things don't even leave the room unless they're generally in my hands or the hands of our lead cataloger. We are climate controlled sometimes. We have a separate HVAC system, and it's working pretty well these days. Our outside windows are UV protected, so it's like they have really good sunglasses on. So really the idea in the Maryland is things are to last for as long as possible. What I like to tell when I get school groups in is that we're like the Noah's Ark for Frederick County relating to Maryland history and culture. There are other institutions who have many of the materials we have, but not necessarily within an hour of where we are. And again, our things are to last for as long as possible. And again, when I'm talking to middle school kids, it's like your great grandkids can come here and see that book on St. Mary's County snakes. Okay, I also want to throw in some kind of educational or read more about it librarian moments here, because besides being an archivist, I also am a librarian and historian. And I know out here, you may not know these things, just like I know very little about Virginia. And I will admit, when something comes to the river, while we do collect going across the river, again, while we are the Maryland Room, collect all aspects of Maryland history and culture, we do collect into our border areas, into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, and even down to DC. Largely what we collect for those areas tends to be genealogical. Not all of our patrons are genealogists, just like all the patrons here are not genealogists, but they are our bread and butter. And if family history wasn't the phenomena that it is now and has become over the 20th century into the 21st century, I'd be doing story time somewhere, and nobody wants to see that happen. So that we do collect into those areas because, as Laura was saying, families don't stop at the river, or at the border. They don't go, oh, I've crossed the Mason-Dixon, I better go back. Or I'm into DC. So a lot of the materials we collect will be genealogical in scope, and we're very much excited to collect items that people recommend to us across the river. I won't name names, but we've gotten some very exciting things because someone in this room has recommended them to us. And also we will, besides just genealogical materials, we also will sometimes collect, basic histories of the counties as well. There's a difference between what we're willing to spend money on and then what we're willing to take if given. We've gotten some donations in recently that have had quite a bit, in our world, quite a bit could be, 10 volumes of things relating to Virginia. Now, we're not going to collect down into Southern Virginia, or what I would call Southern Virginia. I don't know what you all call it down there. I wouldn't collect down that way, but I do collect into the river and then down the Appalachians quite a bit. And we're excited to have it. We had a donor a while back who died. Well, we got some things and then he died, and as often happens, we then got more things, who had at one point in time before he retired, had been a tour guide in DC. So that added to our non-genealogical materials relating to the District of Columbia. But as I'm sure some of you have done some aspect of genealogy, and you can't do local history of also outdoing genealogy, which a lot of historians don't really understand. And a lot of the tools that local historians use, the indexes and abstracts and transcriptions, were created originally for genealogists, the land records, the church records. So anything else we have adds, we like to say, meat to the bones. We like to meet all the information needs of our patron as much as possible when they're in our facility. And of course, we then, part of being librarianship and archives is sending people off to other facilities as well. But again, if you're in our area, if you're within an hour of us, you can at least start some aspect of any part of your Maryland research with us. And besides just using our resources, again, we know people. And also we know people across the river. So we regularly send people over here when people over here aren't making us feel bad about, not anyone here, but when our patrons aren't going, well, they got their own building. So these are two of my most favorite histories of Maryland, just in case you want to do some bathtub reading sometime soon. Maryland, A Middle Temperament by Bob Brugger is fabulous. It's an older work now. I'm hoping he's going to redo it at some point in time. Bob's not all that old, and it's fabulous. And not only is the text fabulous, the annotated bibliography is a thing of beauty. For many years, that was all that I ever used, was the annotated bibliography. Excuse me. And then I taught a Maryland class. I teach them through FCC's ILR program and also through Hopkins Osher program. And my Maryland history class is one of my most popular classes. So I actually read the book, and this is so well written, and he does not waste a word. So you can't just say, let me just before dinner read about the Civil War, because you're going to be there 5 hours later, because you can't skim it. He doesn't waste a single word. Beautifully written. I think I got some awards for doing that. And again, the bibliography is fabulous. It's just older now, but I'm again hoping he'll redo it. And then A Maryland History of Its People is a compilation. This was written as a high school textbook. It's a good read too. I mean, Brugger's beautifully written. This is a good text. One thing I would say about Maryland, A History of Its People is that different historians wrote different chapters, and sometimes you'll go, well, didn't I just read about that? Because they'll bring it up again. But both are fabulous works. There's a new edition of Maryland, A History of Its People. Maryland, A Middle Temperament is still in print. And again, I hope one day he'll do a new version. And I mentioned to him once years ago, when he does, I want to do the annotated bibliography, but he may not remember that, so who knows. But beautiful works. I cannot say enough. Also, this is a new work for me. I know you all collect some things by Jim Rice here. I didn't see this in the catalog, but I was searching quickly and my PowerPoint was blowing up. And this talks a lot about the early years, particularly the early Native Americans living along the Potomac, both in Maryland and Virginia. It really opened up my eyes to a lot of things, to the reasons why I say certain things that I say about Native American history in Frederick County. Jim also writes very nicely. I think you have something here that he wrote about Bacon's Rebellion, but it's a great book. I haven't read the whole thing, but fabulous, a really nice work. Okay, and this is from a Roots website. Then I have the URL where you can click on it and it changes all the boundaries for Maryland, because you maybe assume Maryland didn't look that way when it first started out. And so this is at 1748, at the time of Frederick County's formation, which is always how I view Frederick County and also view Maryland. But again, just kind of showing that we collect for the entire state. Also, we do collect a little bit into Delaware, because if those pens hadn't cheated, that would be part of Maryland now. So, but according to Lord Calvert at the time, they were, I forget how he phrased it, were unmanly in their approach or something like that. They showed him a bad map. And then the king said, you two stop fighting. And that's why we had the Mason-Dixon line. Anyway, fabulous. So we do have some things going into Delaware, but again, we do collect for the whole state. I will admit some parts of the state have less things published. Allegheny and Garrett County is not necessarily a hubbub of publishing activity, unfortunately. But we do collect. One time, and I still might do it, I wanted to have an intern create a chart and do land records, wills, major histories, and look at every county and see what we needed. As I'm sure here too, we are constantly adding things to the collection. And besides those things that are formally published, like Maryland, A Middle Temperament by Hopkins Press, or things that are published by the genealogy publishing houses. When we call something a book or a secondary sources, it can be a report that someone has done, printed out at Staples and brought to us. If our book catalogers can catalog it, and it's not something we need to worry about in regards to certain aspects of preservation, like we need to make, like it's full of original photographs and we want to make sure people wear gloves, or we're afraid of the map needs to be folded out, we will catalog it. My coworker, the Maryland room is staffed by myself and one other individual, a coworker named Derek, who was transferred in a few years back when my former coworker, Carolyn, retired. So we are two. When the Maryland first opened up in the new facility, I had myself and then two part-time people. So we were two full-time equivalents. One of them got transferred out. Carolyn was made full-time, and now Derek is full-time. Of course, we don't have enough staff. Nobody has enough staff. Nobody has enough space. Crimea River. It's the nature of our field. But I also have a core group of volunteers, which fluctuates as they go out to other aspects of their life. Also, sometimes they go on to the greater glory of the genealogy library in the sky. And sometimes I'll have young people who are interns from Hood College, occasionally from the University of Maryland Library School, sometimes from some other library schools in Pennsylvania as well. And occasionally we had this fabulous woman, a young woman, Lauren, who was with us for a year while she was getting ready to go to library school. So they come and go, unfortunately. I do have a fabulous volunteer. All my volunteers are fabulous, but I have a particular volunteer, Marilyn, who really loves doing Maryland land research. So if you ever have any desire to do some Maryland land research and don't want to do it yourself, she loves doing it and does it very quick. If she's not out gardening or looking at birds, she can do a title search, back to the Calverts in just a very short period of time. Don't hesitate to ask us to do that, because I never hesitate to ask her to do that. And she promises to never leave me. So it will be very good. So again, we collect for the entire state. And this is just the website, the history of county formations in Maryland. It's just lots of fun. You just can watch the boundaries move around. And this is Frederick County at a more detailed level at the time of its formation. We are considered the mother of Western Maryland. I used to have a colleague out in Frostburg who would scoff at that, but we are the mother of Western Maryland. And actually, I recently had a disagreement with some board members at Landmarks, because someone wrote a grant and they were talking about, that we were mid-Maryland. It was like, we are Western Maryland. Historically, we are Western Maryland. They weren't listening to me, but we changed the nature of agriculture in Frederick County. We had a lot of Germanics, as you had here too, coming through, which changed the culture as well of Maryland. So when I think about Frederick County, this is what I consider to be Frederick County. Halfway into Carroll County. So if you don't know Maryland, this is us here, Frederick County. We have the largest land mass. Baltimore County says they're larger, but they have some lakes, so it's not really land. I guess it is under the lake, but you can't develop on it, which is not a bad thing, probably. And this is Carroll County right next to us, which was formed later. As you can see here, 1837. And then we have Washington County, Allegheny Garrett, and then down to Montgomery County, and then to Georgetown. Georgetown was also part of Frederick County at the time of its formation and was a major tobacco port for Montgomery County when it was formed. So Montgomery County broke off in 1776. I'll mention that because it's our big anniversary year. And then also Washington County, which then breaks up more. So when I think Frederick County, this is what I think of. When people talk to me about Montgomery County, say, well, you were Frederick County. So while we collect for the entire state, we put special emphasis on historic Frederick County, Western Maryland. But again, we do collect for the entire state, and again, crossing into borders. And again, for our books, well, for secondary sources, the entire state. For primary sources, really just Frederick City, Frederick County. And again, it doesn't have to be published. It can be a report that someone gives us. We have volunteers and also just patrons who will come in for every Thursday for 3 years and index 1 year of the newspaper and print it out and give it to us. Genealogists, and I'm thankful for them, or I would not have a career, do lots of weird things sometimes, none of which I ever find to be very odd. I mean, I think there's nothing better than spending a good time in a cemetery, but they do lots of things, and our catalog reflects all of those very things. Just so you know, I'm sure you're all aware of the Ark and the Dove, which is our version of the Mayflower, was 1634. And 1732 is when the backwoods opened up, which would then become Frederick County. There was a lot of Germanics were coming into Philadelphia, coming across. So there's a lot of concern between the Calverts and the Penns. And then they also started heading down the trail. And there was also concern about the Calverts and Lord Fairfax. So that That's why the backwoods opened up so that Marylanders, the Calverts, could send Marylanders in to really to develop the land, or to homestead the land is probably a better word, so that Lord Fairfax wouldn't be, say, well, that's actually Virginia because there's all these Virginians here, or that the Penns wouldn't go, well, there's all those Pennsylvanians over there. Are they paying taxes to us? Therefore, that must be our land. So again, that's why we have the Mason-Dixon line. And it got particularly, unfortunately, we put more emphasis on the fight between Pennsylvania and Maryland than we do on the disagreements over into Virginia, which we probably should give more thought to that. But it got pretty nasty sometimes between Pennsylvania and Maryland. If any of you are familiar with a guy named Cressup, who was kind of our version of Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone, and I like to call him a terrorist for the Calverts. He was many things. He was many things. But eventually one time he got arrested by Pennsylvania and was taken to court in Philadelphia. And if you'll excuse me, he was a real ballsy kind of guy. Again, he'd been an outwoodsman, had come over from England very young, made his way across Maryland, owned land, was both friends of the Native Americans and also was someone to massacre the Native Americans. Again, life on the frontier is really what it was, but worked for the Calverts, worked for Daniel Delaney as well, who's really the founder of Frederick City. So he was captured, taken to Philadelphia. And he said, when he was being testifying, this is the prettiest town in all of Maryland. He had his own thoughts because, again, Philadelphia should have been part of Maryland. Anyway, just to kind of put things in context, we are much later. Western Maryland is developed much later, 100 years later, than Southern Maryland and the Eastern Shore. Okay, that's really where development in Maryland fixated on. They were largely tobacco farmers, so they didn't need community. They certainly didn't need towns. They just needed waterways, and the Chesapeake Bay is full of waterways to get their tobacco to a port, and a port could just be, a piece of wood where a ship could tie up. So they weren't concerned about developing communities. There's books all written about the book, which is why on the Eastern Shore there's so little towns even today, because they didn't need them at the time. But Daniel Delaney, who again was the developer of Frederick City, all these Germanics were coming in and heading down the Appalachian Trail and going into Virginia. And so they wanted to pull them back to get some to really develop the land in Frederick County, because they were good farmers, hard workers, and the sort of farming they did, the diversified farming, needed community. Because if you're growing rye, do we make something out of rye? You need a distiller. If you're growing grain, you need somebody else. So that would then develop the land and make it very clear who owned this land. It's actually very interesting. But again, we changed the nature of agriculture in Frederick County. This is just a really interesting dissertation. This is Jim Rice again. And I will admit, I've only read the first couple of chapters. He's talking about crime and punishment. So he's talking about the difference between how the Germans and the African Americans and the English would have seen crime and punishment. But the first two chapters are an excellent history of Frederick County. He does a good job synthesizing other information. It might just be the first chapter. There's also a textbook history of Frederick County by Paul and Rita Gordon. Paul was mayor of Frederick a while back. They both have passed since then. They're World War II generation. They both died not because of COVID, but during quarantine. And textbook history of Frederick County, while it was written for the schools, also does a very nice job of synthesizing the information. But Jim's work is I like his work a lot. I pull it all the time. Okay, and this is out of Jim's work, which is just showing this migration that I've been mentioning, which again, you all know because your people came here too. So again, these Germanics coming across, and people came into Frederick County other ways. This is just the migration pattern that we really fixate on. There's also the migration pattern coming up from Prince George's County, which is near DC. Again, I don't know what you all know about Maryland. I kind of know where Richmond is, but that doesn't mean you necessarily know where Annapolis is. But they're coming up from Prince George's County, which was the mother of Frederick County, and that's the English. And the English weren't always English. Like Daniel Delaney, again, was Irish. And, we Irish don't like being called English. But when I think about English, if you've ever seen the movie Witness with Harrison Ford, you really should see it. And Kelly McGillis, it takes place in Amish country. And they're always telling him, be careful out among them English, which is really just people who are not Amish. So when we say English, we mean those people who are not Germanics. So they came up, the Chesapeake migrants. They then kind of formed Montgomery County, which again is southern Frederick County, which is a hotbed of development right now. Well, as if Frederick isn't, but is a real hotbed of development and is very much the bedroom community of Washington, D.C. So you have the Germanics coming down. the Chesapeake migrants coming up. And then we have people also coming in, well, from all sorts of places, but also there was a migration pattern out of New York and New Jersey coming down as well. And then, of course, we had enslaved people and also free blacks coming in from different directions. The Chesapeake migrants were more inclined to have more enslaved people than the Germanics were. Not that the Germanics didn't have enslaved people. You will have some Germanics who will have, one or two enslaved people. It wasn't the nature of agriculture as they knew it in Germany, obviously. And the type of agriculture they did, it wasn't cost effective to have enslaved people because you only needed them for a few months, as compared to the hellish experience of growing tobacco, where you constantly need labor all year round. I've had students in my different classes who grew up, in Southern Maryland, picking worms off tobacco, and it doesn't sound like a good time on anyone's front. So they were more inclined to use enslaved people that way. Anyway, so just kind of showing that, and again, down into the Shenandoah Valley and into you people's lands and continuing on. If you ever care to know more about the history of the development of Frederick County and why Western Maryland developed a little later, this is a really excellent publication by Frank Porter. He's actually a geographer. This is based on his dissertation, I believe, maybe his master's thesis, which gives a wide variety of reasons I won't go into today about why Western Maryland developed later. And some of it makes even more sense if you read Jim Rice's new book about, well, not new, but his most recent book about the Potomac country. I just wanted to bring this up. I didn't get a chance to take a look to see if you all carry this here. Western Maryland Genealogy. It is no longer being published, but a real useful publication for looking at Western Maryland genealogy and family history. It has a number of volumes. There's not a comprehensive index, though I understand that someone's going to be doing that in the near future, but each volume is indexed, and it's not necessarily indexed by person specific, but it's worth taking a look at of those sorts of other genealogical publications and that people don't often think about. Again, before I get more into our collection, which hopefully I've been kind of interweaving in and out, I wanted to do some more commercial interruptions. The Maryland History and Culture Bibliography, which is available at the University of Maryland's website. This was a project of the Maryland Humanities Council, gosh, like 25 years ago now. And what they did is they hired, no money changed hands, they hired people, experts in different fields. So the women's history, colonial history, Native American history, local history, to take a look at bibliographies that are done by Maryland Historical Magazine, which is our scholarly publication of Maryland history put out by the Maryland Historical Society, or Maryland History and Culture, as they now call themselves. And so to go through that and also add other things into it. So if you care about any aspect of Maryland history and culture, it's worth going in here and searching. It's not searching everything, but it's searching a big hunk of publications of the 20th century, and not only things that appeared in Maryland Historical Magazine, but books that came out, things that appeared in other less obvious publications. You'll get a lot of things in here that don't necessarily appear in the big history databases like American History and Life. Unfortunately, the essays were also written, did not transfer over to University of Maryland. This was a project of the Maryland Humanities Council, and they had it up for many years, and they went on to other things, and the University of Maryland took it in. But we do have some of those essays printed out, mostly the ones I wrote, but also some other essays printed out and put into our collection. And this just shows you the wide variety of subject headings that are applied there. So if you care about the Civil War, the Eastern Shore, Native American, Howard County, fine and decorative arts, it's worth taking a look at just to see what's out there. Not everything in the world is online. I think probably everyone in here knows that. This is everything in the world. This much is online, and of this, only this much is really important. And for all of our lifetimes, not that much more is going to be put online. Putting stuff online is not free. And also sometimes it's just not relevant. Not everything, I wouldn't say deserves, because it's great stuff. It's like they don't need to deserve to be online. But not everything needs to be online or should be online. And there's other ways to look for things as well. So I'm sure you all know this, even things that are up, that are online. We'll use the census as the best example, which is one of the major tools of genealogists and local historians use. The way to really search the census, these days, very few do anyone use microfilm. The 1950, they didn't even put on microfilm, and I'm sure it's closed for 72 years. But you could search all you want in Ancestry and not find it because the indexer did not pick up what you're looking for. You search in Family Search and there it is. Or it's not neither of them and you look in a print publication. I was recently looking for Mother Seton, who, first American-born saint up in Emmitsburg, which is in northern Frederick County. And I was trying to find her in I forget what year census, and I couldn't find her online. So I went over and I pulled my index for 1840 or whatever, and there she was. So to really do a definitive search. And sometimes you don't need to do a definitive search. And there's another word that genealogists use, which I can't think right now, to really do like the best search possible. And you don't always need to do the best search possible. You can't always just rely on one book or one website or any website. You've got to go to a variety of places. And isn't that the part of the fun of doing research? At least part of the fun from our side of you all doing research. So if you care about Maryland history, this is worth taking a look at. I'd also like to mention that Maryland Historical Magazine, besides being included in the Maryland History and Culture Bibliography, up until I think the most recent 2 years, you can get it all online. We also have hard copies. I don't know if you guys have that here or not, but we have hard copies. But you can also get it all at 3 a.m. online, and it prints out very nicely. This was a project of the Maryland State Archives and Maryland Historical Society. Maryland Historical Society is the publisher of it. So this is really good. Like when I'm preparing for a class and I got to look at that 1925 article again, and class is at 10. You can do that there. So just another thing to be aware of. And again, talking about those things to be aware of, Pioneers of Old Democracy, which you do have here, is an excellent history of the early settlement of Frederick County, particularly kind of in eastern Frederick County, based very much on primary sources, which sometimes when we look at early histories, and this isn't that early, this is maybe the 70s or the 80s. So it's not like those late 19th, early 20th century histories that were written. That before, the whole idea of graduate education was brought to America from Germany to Johns Hopkins, and people didn't know they're supposed to footnote things. This is excellent. It's based on land records and on marriage records and some church records. It's really very good. And it's not a bad read. It's a better read if you know what you're reading, if you know what the area is. If you just suddenly pick it up and go, well, Eastern Frederick County, and have no idea where you are. I'm not saying it's gripping. But if you care about that part of the world or have people there or started researching communities there, and there's also great little maps. Anyway, just worth taking a look at. And here's another one. As I said, I don't know what blew up and what didn't blow up. In and out of Fredericktown, this is a children's, written for children, but it talks about the development of Fredericktown and particularly colonial occupations. There's some interesting things there. One thing I find in the field of local history and genealogy is that there's very seldom something published that doesn't have something in it that's of some use. We also collect a lot of how-to-do-it books on genealogy and public history, and I've never found one, even one that was published in 1956, that didn't have something that was of educational value. Okay, they're not going to have websites in them, and even ones that were done in 1999 will have an outdated website, but the methodology and the sources stay. Even those sources that are destroyed, still it's good to know what got destroyed either on purpose or accidentally. And then in what we again consider to be books, children's books can also be really useful. And just like, as I said, anything that someone prints out and brings to us, we always ask people when they're doing research in the Maryland to please give us a copy of your final product. Very few people ever do. But those who do, it's great. And we have a collection, which we don't treat as a collection from an archival viewpoint. It's just on the shelf. There was I wouldn't say history professor, but a history teacher at Linganore High School, which is heading to the east part of Frederick County, who had his kids do local history articles. Now, yeah, these were written by 13 and 14-year-olds, some of whom were probably not history savants, and some of them weren't even, English savants, or maybe even didn't take their 101 English class very well. But sometimes they'll have photographs in them. Sometimes there are oral histories in them. So you never know when even something done by an 8th grader can be of use to you, even if you're doing your doctoral dissertation, even as a starting point. Genealogy, and for those of you who do genealogy and local history, it's all about following those little breadcrumbs. It's going through the forest, trying to find grandma's house, it really is finding grandma's house, finding those little breadcrumbs as you go along, and you never know which breadcrumbs are going to be useful to you or not. And also not finding is finding. So that's my little lecture there for now. So as I said, we collect a lot of things. So we have about 30,000 titles at this point in time, and some of our titles are multi-volumes. This actually isn't where these books are located right now, but I just want to mention that we have a pretty good Civil War collection, which includes a lot of reference works, which I believe most of which are here, if I remember correctly, when I came to hear George Lewis's talk. But it's a fabulous thing that was given to us after we started. Before we got this collection, pretty much what we cared about in relating to the Civil War was just things that occurred in Maryland, okay, and in the surrounding areas. I used to scoff at the only thing, and nothing but the deepest respect meant, the only thing I cared about Lincoln was that he was killed by a Marylander, which isn't completely true. I mean, he was a Marylander, but that wasn't the only thing I cared about Lincoln, but that was mostly, so we cared about, Booth and his run and all that kind of stuff. But once we got this collection from George Brigham, who's a local historian who's very pivotal in regards to the development of the South Mountain State Park, and George collected over the years, he started doing his own, genealogist, again, they're kind of be crazy. He started buying works for himself and then thought, well, I need this whole set of 200 books in order to do my research at night. And so kept adding things. And also he collected beautiful works and took good care of his things. So this really broadened what we can give people. So we've got, as I'm sure you guys have here, the Big Virginia Regimental Series, but we also have Regimental Series, which I think is this right here, actually, this kind of blue-gray thing. For South Carolina, we have the Confederate Veteran Magazine. Again, a lot of things I'm sure that are here, but it's broadened how we look at the Civil War. And because there were so many battles around Frederick County and wounded people were being brought right and left, we will have people come to the Maryland who were from Massachusetts, whose great-great-grandfather died at the hospital down the street. So it does add a little bit more emphasis to that. Civil War is not my favorite time period, and certainly a whole lot more happened in Frederick County than the Civil War, but we do collect pretty broadly for it. And then over there is government documents, which I've already mentioned. Neither of these are right now, they're in another room because we've expanded, but I'd like to mention over here too, we have 4 microfilm reader printers, one of which also does fiche. We don't get as much play on microfilm as we used to. I was looking at some statistics, and like 15 years ago, we pull over, 150 reels a month. Those days are gone. But that said, recently we pulled 30 because sometimes you got to read the paper. Sometimes the digital product isn't good. And the Frederick News and the Frederick Post, which is the Frederick News Post, which is the newspaper of record for Frederick County, has been digitized by Newspaper Archive. It's a bad product. Okay, there's pages missing. Its search is funny. Some of you may know, and this isn't their problem. It's their problem, but not their fault. They were hacked 2 months ago, and it hasn't quite recovered from that. But there's stuff missing. I know it's missing because I have the microfilm. So like we search online, we found August 5th, 1945. And I'm making this up. I'm not making up the concept, but that particular date. And there's page 1 and page 5. We go to the microfilm, it's all there. So they had trouble when they did the digitization. So we do sometimes still have people use microfilm. Right now, our local theater, the Weinberg, which was originally the Tivoli, is going to celebrate their 100th anniversary. They've been sending volunteers to come to just read the newspaper, to see the ads for the theater and what was going on. So sometimes you got to read the newspaper. Years ago, we had a professor at Hood College, which is the liberal arts college in Frederick. It used to be a women's college, who was signing. He was a civil rights historian. He assigned it to his kids, like, you do 1961, you do 1960, and look for things relating to civil rights. Well, you can't search the newspaper and search civil rights. It's not going to come up. And sometimes kids of that age wouldn't even have known particularly what terms to use for articles about Black people as well. So they had to read the newspaper, and then they'd see things where, some young men were thrown out of a theater for no good reason, that kind of thing. So sometimes, as I'm sure you all know, you got to read the newspaper. And so we do have 4 microfilm readers. We also have the only microfilm fiche reader in Frederick County, and I think our surrounding area, I don't know about you all here, that prints. So we've had people come in from West Virginia to use it, and also servicemen of a particular generation, probably like my generation, the generation right after me, got their military records on fiche. So they have to come in to print those out. And during COVID, when we were closed to the public, and I was pretty much there all by myself, my coworker Carolyn was my partner at that point in time, and we couldn't be in the room at the same time. I did at least 3 times meet somebody down at our loading dock, all masked up, took their fiche, came running up, printed them out, and gave it back to them so they could then, next day, so they could apply for their veterans benefits. So film is our best preservation media after good, well done. There's a lot of bad microfilm. Good microfilm is our best preservation media after stone tablets. And often a lot of the things that are digitized are coming out of a microfilm, not all the time, but a lot. So besides the News and the Post and the News Post, we also have some of the earlier newspapers in Frederick County on microfilm. Some of those are digitized, some are not. And then we do collect today's local newspapers. So the Brunswick newspaper, there was a newspaper in Emmitsburg that we collected as well. That's been digitized. The microfilm isn't very good, but we do collect those local newspapers as well, because not everything, some of those are never going to be digitized, the Middletown newspaper. But we do got, let me say again, 4 microfilm reader printers and 1 fiche reader printer if you need someone who ever needs to print that. Okay, to kind of quickly go through the other miscellaneous things. At this point in time, we have over 300 manuscript, archival, or personal papers collections. This includes the Thurmont, what's at THC, which is the Thurmont Center for Agricultural History, which is located in our Thurmont branch to the north part of Frederick County. We have a small room there, which is about half of this space, which is where our agricultural material goes. And we actively collect it, and we still promote the Granges, the homemakers, the Extension Service records. It's very much focused on agriculture. It's not a collection that gets a lot of use, but it's there. And there's several, if you know anyone, the young historians, there's a lot of dissertations that could happen in that room if people just really utilized it. So we've got a number of collections there, and then the collections we have. A lot of our collections tend to be, though not always, be very 20th century focused. You know, we are a relatively new institution as compared to our colleagues at the Historical Society of Frederick County, or Heritage Frederick, as they call themselves now. And you don't have to be an old institution to have old stuff, but a lot of the older stuff, because we've got letters from Thomas Johnson. We've got the letter to Lafayette saying, hey, come on, stop by in Frederick while you're in Maryland. And then him writing back going, yeah, sure, I will. So we do have some older stuff, but most of our collections are going to be more modern. And we like to think that's kind of our strength. Just as an example, we have a definitive collection of Miss Frederick pageant booklets. And then we have a lot of family papers. This is the Buzzard family. Now, these are older things. We have deeds for the Buzzards, were a family that lived up in the mountains near Thurmont, and we've got a number of their deeds relating to their property up there. So that's a little bit older. And then the Spurrier family papers, these are more World War II, the after family, and including some delightful things such as photographs of the dogs. So our family papers, our manuscript materials, our archival materials, you know, it's going to be a mixed media collection. It's going to be stereotypical photographs. Also, sometimes there's oral histories in there. There's papers, there's deeds. It's a wide variety, as you'll see in any institution, such as here, that collects archival materials. You simply never know what you're going to find. These are at various levels of processing because there's just two of us. At various times, we have had archival students come in to finish. I was at a workshop yesterday, and the one thing they were talking about is that processing was a circle, which I never really quite thought about it that way, because, you know, even at institutions who have lots of staff and no one has enough staff, you know, a collection will be completely processed, but then they reprocess it because they've got new materials, or they're looking at it in a new way, or suddenly they're going to change the terminology being used. So it's a never-ending process. This is something we're very excited about. This is Bud Murphy. Bud went to World War II, was killed in the Philippines very young. His nephews and great-nephew, who never knew him, his nephews had served in Vietnam. His great-nephew, when they came to see us, I think was in Iraq. Bud wrote home to his sister. We have photographs of a lot of sweaty young men in the Philippines. We have his next screen, I think we have his Purple Heart. And the family had been holding on to them, but then they turned them over to us, which I thought was really very nice of them. And they had never met Bud, but his sister had been their mother or grandmother, and so they were looking for a repository for these. So we do like to put a lot of emphasis. You know, we collect pretty much anything on Frederick City and Frederick County, but there's certain topics we put a lot of emphasis on. One of those are things relating to education. Another one are things often relating to military. We are an official collecting partner, or we were, for the Veterans History Project when it existed in Frederick County. And even if you go back, because if you look at, and this is one of those things that didn't come through, we have a really nice set of written by a man named Henry Peden, which I don't think you all have any of Peden's things here. It's very Maryland specific,
Yes,
but they do.
There's one or two.
One of them? Okay. We'll trust it. I was searching quickly and the computer was blowing up on me. And then we have a full run of hero books for each county and the patriots who served from each county. So we collect a lot of things on all the conflicts, really all the conflicts. But we were very excited when they, if not honored, when this was brought to us. There's Bud. This is Bud here. And he might have been there 3-4 months when he was killed. Here's his Purple Heart. They even gave us his Purple Heart, really very exciting. And then again, as I said, education. Liberty High School is a high school that no longer exists. They had a newsletter, as they often do. And then our most famous manuscript collection is the Linton Hocraft Obituary Collection, which this is its beauty shot, okay? I know everyone in this room probably knows this. It's a card catalog. Okay, this is what we used to use before the OPAC. A search engine, yes, this is a search engine of that period. And it was started by a man named Jacob Hocraft, who did our major cemetery survey, at least for white cemeteries for Frederick County. And again, genealogists do crazy things. He did many, many things. Besides a cemetery survey, he also clipped obituaries from the 1930s until he started going blind. Then he turned it over to two local genealogists, Jack and Betty Linton. They kept doing it really until Jack died. And then it came to us. It was always going to come to us. They kept waiting for that new building to be built. So that took Jack and Betty. Betty used to say, I thought we'd have it for a couple of years. They had it for like 20 years waiting for the building to be built. And then after we closed it, we like to say the last card we filed, this is what the cards look like. The last card that we filed was Jack's. And then my coworker, Carolyn, started to print it out. We thought we would probably close the collection, but my former director, who was LDS, people at church were asking him. So we continued on. And we've recently closed it just because of the amount of workload, but we can always rebuild it, or someone who comes after us can rebuild it because we have lists of the deceased. So they would cut, clip. These ones are Jack and Betty's because you can tell that they typed it on it. Wholecraft, also it's interesting because we don't know how many cards are in there. We think it's the second largest obituary collection in the country. The largest is at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library, which isn't an official presidential library, but they have a very large collection. But we can't really count it because Wholecraft worked for the Baltimore Sun. He was a typesetter, and so he cut his own cards. He would take leftover stock. So 1 inch may be 50 cards, 1 inch maybe 300 cards. You never really know depending upon what he was utilizing. Also, he would sometimes really shellacked them. His eldest son was killed in World War II, and it's really very sad, besides the fact that he was killed in World War II, is that he really heavily shellacked his obituary in the hopes that it would last for longer, which of course is going to make it last less longer. Though the fact that they're on those little cabinets, they're in their own little microcosm world. So you really never know. But Wholecraft was very organized, and he was a really kind of crafty kind of guy, not like crafty like a fox, but crafty like Martha Stewart. His wife was a librarian for the Baltimore, Craft Free Library in Baltimore. We also have the typescript of some of his obituaries, and he played a very large role because he worked nights and she worked days raising the kids. He cooked, he finished painting the house, he'd start painting it again, he canned, he did cemetery surveys. And then one part that's really kind of sad, in one of the obituaries, he talks about how he does, how does his wife put up with him, and that he hasn't really done anything in the world, which is really kind of sad. It's like years ago, I was at American Library Association, and the woman, a cartoonist who did For Better or Worse, she was good friends with Charles Schulz, who, if you didn't know, had a lot of depression. And Charles Schulz thought he didn't do anything. The man who created Snoopy thought he did not contribute to the world. So Wholecraft very much contributed to the genealogical world. And also because he was crafty and very organized, everything that he did, he put on little index cards, just like we used to learn in middle school. So besides this obituaries, there's also notes for indexes he did. It's a great collection. And it used to get a lot of really, really heavy use. We used to do an incredibly high volume obituary business. Not as much anymore, but it's still really useful. We're more than happy to print out every Brandenburg for somebody, or give everybody every Zimmerman they want. And we use it a lot for quick reference. This is just an example from his cemetery survey work. It's a fabulous thing. I'm sad and it doesn't get as much work as it used to, but newspaper archive may not last forever. Okay, there's just some more of the cards. Okay, we also, as we kind of head downhill, Laura's come in the room, so I think that's a clue that maybe we're getting there. That we have what we like to think is the largest community cookbook collection in Maryland. We don't know if it's true or not, but we like to make believe it is. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We had a number of donors who collected these for us. Then we have our own. We treated it as a manuscript collection. It's a fascinating, fun collection, but it's really unruly because this cone binding, they stick to each other, you shelve it, they're stuck. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. And my former coworker, Carolyn, who became our book cataloger, which is why she had to stop clipping obituaries, simply refused to have anything to do with it. So we created a manuscript collection. So we have a spreadsheet. And if you look into our catalog, for our manuscript collections, as I said, we have different levels of processing. I think we probably have 40 collections, which isn't all that much if you think about 300, but we've got lots of other inventories and stuff. Probably 40 completed finding aids. They are not up, but if you search our catalog, there'll be a collection level description up there. So there's a collection level description for this. And then recently, as we've added new cookbooks, then we actually have given them Dewey numbers because it got too confusing to add things back and forth to the collection. I've had some interns and volunteers who do some really fascinating exhibits with them. They're very cool. Also, we do occasionally have someone come in saying, my grandmother used to make that recipe from the Emmitsburg Firehouse's cookbook. Do you have it? Because I've lost it. So occasionally we do get people who are looking for recipes that appear in these things. And it really shows, community cookbooks, besides us showing recipes of foodways of that time. We live in a time now where local foodways aren't as strong as they used to be. I grew up in Central Jersey. We got our pizza from Italians. We got our lobsters from the Atlantic Ocean. Where I grew up now, you go to Pizza Hut or you go to Red Lobster. I have a cookbook which actually was put together by a woman who taught me a lot of genealogy, a woman named Dwayne Smith, who was from Brunswick, but I knew her in Howard County. And there's a lovely recipe for squirrel in there, which I never hope to make, hope to never have to make. But again, we change how we eat. And also for a lot of times for women, this is all that's left behind for some women, particularly women who, may have died in the 1940s or 1950s, where their obituary doesn't even give their real first name. I would love if someone could go through and make a list, and there's too many of them, but maybe one day, and actually make a list of every woman's name in these cookbooks, because these are predominantly done by women, And it's also for some organizations, that's all there is. We have one that was put together by a local Walmart because a woman died and she left behind a little baby, and it was a fundraiser to set up a college fund. So they're fascinating stuff. I love foodways. It's really cool stuff. And I was kind of alluding to this when I mentioned Bud. We were the official collecting partner for the Frederick County Veterans History Project at the beginning. They're kind of in a frozen state. This was when the History Project first started up, and which comes out of Library of Congress, as you probably know, was put forth through Congress. It was back during that time when there were still World War I vets alive. It's like every so many seconds a World War I vet dies. Now we're probably pretty much every 5 seconds a World War II veteran dies. But they did a lot of oral histories. Library of Congress at that point in time was encouraging them to stay in the community. So we've got a couple hundred interviews, mostly World War II and Korean War, a couple of more modern conflicts. I don't know if we have any World War I, a lot of Korean War. And it's really, we're very excited, very proud of it. It also includes some other things, but the fact that this exists is the reason we got Bud Murphy's stuff. Okay, even though there's no oral history for Bud, that's why we got Bud's. And a while back, there's a company whose name escapes me, who runs, those trips for high school seniors to go to DC. Okay, and this company was also then hired by the Park Service to create oral history experiences for the Vietnam Wall and also for the World War II monument, okay? And so they went to Library of Congress to look for interviews, and Library of Congress said, it's going to take us forever to pull these. Go up to Frederick. So they did come up to Frederick, and I had an intern at the time who pulled our best Vietnam interviews, our best World War II interviews, and one of our best Vietnam interviews was done by a gentleman who's still alive, because Vietnam vets aren't all that old, really. They're getting older. But they're close in age to me, so I don't like to think they're all that old. My brother would have been a Vietnam vet, but thankfully his number never came up. But there's a local attorney, Tommy Nykirk, who's a really sweet guy, who wanted to enlist after college. His father said, over my dead body. So then, actually after high school. So Tommy went to college, and then after college he started law school, and then he was drafted. And because he had finished his degree, he went in as a sergeant, I believe, and was put in country, and then wrote letters home. And when you first see the letters, they're typed. Now, I often think, was he on top of a fire base typing away while things were going on? But no, he's an attorney. His father was an attorney. His brother was an attorney. He sent these letters home, and he was close enough to his parents to speak pretty honestly to his parents. He didn't tell them everything, but close enough. His father had a secretary. So they typed up the letters. And we've got copies of the letters. And between college and law school, Tommy took a trip to Mexico with a friend and took a Kodak camera with him and really liked photography. So Tommy took a camera to war with him. And we have copies of hopefully we have some stray copies. I'm hoping one day we'll get his slides. He's done programs for us. He still has his slides. He had photographs. He made them into slides. And he doesn't really present anymore, but he used to do these fabulous talks about Vietnam where he was more than honest about his experiences. But so they used Tommy's letters in order to create the content. If you go to the Vietnam Wall and, buy the little NPS thing and listen, it's Tommy's letters. And it's really fascinating because not only were they able to pull if they came up to us, pull the interviews right away, we were able to also bring a lot of these veterans into the room. So Tommy came in and met with them after they did this. Then we played it for Tommy. And we're like, at the end of it, we're like, those are your letters. And he's like, what? And he went back and re-listened to them. So if you have that experience at the Vietnam Wall, it's Tommy Nykirk, retired attorney from Frederick. And just really cool, very fascinating stuff, and just such a nice guy. I had a program a couple of years back. I won't go into all the details why we had it, but it involved a panel of people who served in Vietnam, including a donut dolly and also a career nurse. And Tommy, who's a pretty soft-spoken kind of guy, but he and his brother and father were the major prosecutors in Frederick County. If you were up for murder, you wanted them as your, as your attorneys. Defendant, whatever the right term would be. And we used to, before this happened, we used to listen to Tommy, because when Carolyn and I used to do research and we come forth to some murder trial or something, man found with bloody knife over body, he got off, defended by Nykirk. So Tommy's very soft-spoken, but he got up there and started singing during the program. And I forget the song he sang, but it was out of Woodstock. He's great. Anyway, so we have a lot of things relating to veterans. That's what I'm getting at. Also, I've already mentioned a lot of newspapers. We have them on microfilm, the News and the News Post. We don't collect the hard copy of newspapers in that time period because they're just going to rot. But we also do have a vertical and a clipping file. Not only do we have the one that we created, but we also have the one the Frederick News Post had, their morgue. So between those, they're both very heavy mid-20th century. We still maintain our vertical file. That's one of the things that Derek does. He prints out articles. And they're not just history topics, those things that we believe are going to be of historical interest in the future. What should I say?
Okay, it wants to do some sort of update or.
Anyway, we got a lot of newspapers and a lot of ways to get into the information. And, when I was looking at the website of the Balch last night and feeling bad about the staff and everything they have and all the databases and stuff, I was.
Oh, now you weren't good.
I was realizing that, I'm a firm believer we all should go to many libraries. All libraries are special. All libraries are unique. But what really differentiates a lot of libraries is not only the superb staff you will find everywhere you go, but also the different things that we have that are specific to our own collections, okay? And I want to as we end up here, as I go over time, I just want to bring forth a number of those unique materials that we have, that only we have. Okay, and I don't mean unique materials like a manuscript collection, but those things that our staff or our volunteers create. Help.
You might have to click into the presentation.
There we go. So why us? Why should you come to the Maryland Room? You've got this great place here. But, why should you go to any other library? You must go, if you're a good researcher or even interested researcher, you should go to many different places because you're going to find different things in different places. And like I often talk about the Historical Society, which is like just down an alley from us. And just like here too, even those collections that are overlap or the research that you can overlap between us is that you can spend 3 days with me. And I forget to mention this one book, and you go to the Historical Society, and it's the first thing they pull. Or you could spend 4 days with them, and I pull 3 other books. Because also, even if you're doing, if you're doing your research over a period of time, and even in that period of time, it's just one day, sometimes what you looked at 10 o'clock in the morning, you don't care about, but at 6 o'clock, you're thinking, what was that thing I looked at 10? So again, why it's good to go to different places and interface with different librarians and different staff and the different things they sort of create. This is our book plate that Carolyn drew. She was an artist. She drew every one of those little leaves. And that's blank. Okay, so here's our Acorn collection. So again, these are publications relating to Frederick City, Frederick County. This is what we used to call our Ready Reference collection. And we call it our Acorn collection because there should be a picture of an acorn there, and there's not. This is where everything blew up. Acorns, because acorns grow family trees. Okay, so this is a great collection. It's 4 or 5 shelves. We're adding to it on occasion. If you're doing Frederick County genealogy, no matter where level you're on, or Western Maryland genealogy, earlier genealogy for Western Maryland, this is a good place to take a look because these are the core things that you should be looking at. We also have this list online, well, digitally. So if you ever care about it, please let me know. I'm happy to forward it to you. But for example, we have here, this is a series, Maryland German Church Records by Frederick Weiser. This is Maryland land deeds. And then I just throw the source in there because I'm always trying to get people to read these important works on how to do research. But it's a great collection. And again, it's particularly good for people who work the room when Derek and I aren't there, or like when Derek was first learning, because someone who works the room because Derek and I are at a conference or whatever, they can just put a genealogist in front of here and it'll keep them busy for the whole day. They don't need to know anything else. And it's not everything on Frederick City, Frederick County. And again, we do collect for the entire state. But it's that pivotal stuff. And again, local historians use that as well. This should be a lovely picture stolen off of the internet of many acorns. I don't know what that could be. This is supposed to be Martin's Genealogical Index to Frederick County. So there's a 4-volume work, Martin's Index to Frederick County Genealogy. We've got 2 sets of it. And what Mr. Martin did, again, crazy genealogist, he went through 120 sources and created an index to the indexes. Why do people do such things? I do not know. But it's fabulous because, again, it's the other starting point. Okay? And certainly things have come out since Martin utilized it. But again, it's a good way to step back, just like, if you're doing genealogy for 10 years, step back, look at the Acorn collection. Have you looked at everything there? Looking at Martin's, have you looked at all those sources that he utilized? And it's just not just because we love indexes, but it's in an index. It's not full text. It's an index to other things. It has a weird little code. There's very few libraries that have the Martins. We've got 2 copies. Also, we're hoarding another copy. If we were kinder, we'd give a copy to one of our colleagues, but we're holding on to that baby. But also, we have Carolyn created an index to the funny little codes because it may say, at the end, it will say like MZ45. And then we got to figure out what is MZ45. And this is showing you, as you can see here, the funny codes and what it's telling you. Thank you for your patience with that. Okay, and then as I mentioned before, different things that other people do. This is a survey of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Point of Rocks that was done by a local Eagle Scout, also a guy who became one of my volunteers and now works at National Archives. But he did, for his Eagle Scout project, he did a survey of the Point of Rocks Cemetery. It doesn't include images. We have his images on a disc, but I think actually the disc is dead now. But I kept telling him to put him up and find a grave, but he went forth and went to library school and got married and had a baby and didn't make it a priority. People. But it's that kind of thing you're going to find in all sorts of libraries. So this is, besides just, okay, one book, it's everywhere on the planet, but it means something different to you on this day in this library because one particular librarian who you trust and who knows things pulled it for you. You're going to find things like this. I think, except for the church, we're the only people with this, okay? And you're going to find throughout the world, at places like here, Allen County Public, Mid-Continent, not all the gems are just in Library of Congress. There's lots of things in lots of places, and that's the only copy we have of this. So again, why it's always good to go to different libraries, and particularly to search the catalogs of different libraries. Not every library has everything in their catalog. We have all of our books in our catalog, but not everything else. Then we have the O'Donoghue Index. This was done by 3 of my coworkers. If you work in a Maryland Public Library and don't have a library degree and work a public service desk, you have to go to something called Latte, which is a little teeny weeny library school, real teeny weeny. And when my colleague Ralph went to library school, he was one of our subs once. We used to call him one of our Maryland pets. And we wanted Ralph to do, in Latte, you had to go to Latte, but then also you had to do a big project. And so we wanted Ralph to do his project in our room. Along came Julie Clark and Gina Bobar as well to help doing this. And it was worked by Louis O'Donoghue, who was one of my volunteers. And before I got there, Louis used to do this index to published family histories in our collection. Back when the mail room was, a third of this, there was one computer. Most of the volunteers didn't want to ever use the computer. So hopefully we have a page. This is just that. Okay, there it goes. So what Louis did was he went through and did a spreadsheet. Louis was a cartographer for the CIA. He actually was one of the people who evaluated the images from Bay of Pigs, kind of cool, and grew up in Emmitsburg from a large Catholic family. And Louis created this index where he went through and he entered all the basic information about every family history we have. And then he'd add the surnames, and he added a whole lot more surnames than our catalogers would have. And then what I thought was the stroke of genius, he then will say what color the cover is. So that's like that red book. You need that red book. That's incredibly helpful. And actually, when I was in library school, our cataloging professor told us, the things we catalog are just things that we have picked. And then she truly said we could just as well have cataloged on the color of the cover. Well, Louis did catalog on the color of the cover and the size of it in the index. So Louis did this. Louis then lost interest and went on to something else. He created this fabulous gazetteer place name book to all the different place names in Frederick County, which sometimes get a lot of gripe because he didn't footnote everything, but particularly for people who didn't grow up here. If someone comes into you and says, well, where was Harmony? You can look it up real fast. Well, Harmony was a half a mile away from, and it looks smart. I'm all for, people like me looking smart to our patrons, even if it's not always true. But then Gina, Ralph, and Julie picked this up. Louis' file was no good, kind of like some of my PowerPoint pages. So they started from scratch and created this huge index, which is now, and this isn't a recent printout, is over 1,500 pages. It changes how people use our family history collection. all of these are in the catalog, but sometimes it's just 3 or 4 subject headings. When I do it, I like to add like 20. I have very little things I do in my job where I have any sense of completion, as much as I love my job, but I very seldom get to like finish something. So when I do this, I'm like, look, I entered 20 names. So it's fabulous. We're more than happy to look things up for people or to send it to people. I'd like to put this up online one day, but it's not happening anytime soon, probably. And then this is David Wallace, who interned. He volunteered with us for many years. Retired Park Service PhD historian. He worked at the Harper Ferry Service Center, so not down below, but up on the hill. And he loved indexing. I mean, the man loved indexing. He also loved transcribing. He also got into World War II at the very end, where he was a file clerk, and he loved being a file clerk. He just loved doing that kind of work. Mr. Wallace died about, 3 years ago now. Some of you may know his daughter, Edie Wallace, who's a local preservationist who's done work in Virginia and Maryland and so on and so forth. So he did a lot of indexes for us. Up until like a few months before he died, any book in our collection that wasn't indexed, we would send home. He's the only one who got to take books home, would send home with him, and he would index. And if it was a little book, he'd do it over lunch. He'd come back, he could do like 3 books in a week. So he did like 400 indexes to books in our collection. And if you're looking at our books, if you find a book and then right next to it is something in a report cover, like we used to use in middle school, you know how expensive those things are now? That usually in there is one of his indexes. He also did other things, such he was very much into social justice. He was also very involved with ARCH, which is our local African-American group. He went through the newspapers, starting with the beginning of the Post, I believe, or the News, whichever was 1883, and then going forward to 1957, which was the last year that Black people were identified by their race in their obituary, and created this index to these obituaries. And also he used other sources as well. It's a fabulous work. It is up at Digital Maryland, and again, has really helped us a great deal in regards to quickly providing, at least starting information for people who are doing their African-American genealogy. I'd like to mention that probably a lot of you are familiar with WorldCat, or at least Public WorldCat. Maryland Public Libraries aren't in there. Okay, just to let you know this, at least most are not. If you go through the staff side, they are. We're not, but we had an intern many years ago. So like if you search this, it comes back and says, it's not telling you there, but not in any library near you, which is a lie, because I know right where it is. But we had an intern who found out that if we enter this, may be found in the Maryland room. So if you're ever searching in here to see if we have something or just searching, make sure you read the notes, because if it says may be found in the Maryland room, that's the truth. They will be found in the Maryland room. Because again, Maryland Public Libraries are not in the public side of WorldCat. WorldCat is a fabulous thing, but keep in mind there is the side that libraries pay for, and there is the side that you guys are getting into publicly, and not every library is in there. And I don't mean just the little historical societies, but people like us. So just use that. And this is up at Digital Maryland as well, which is comes out of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, the State Library Resource Center. But there you have it. But so also, if you're in our catalog, this is a city building in Frederick, and you find something that says index at the end of it, that's Mr. Wallace. So, and again, we're more than happy to provide indexes, because probably, and I know you guys got lots of fabulous indexes up on your website, you may have books here that we have that Mr. Wallace has indexed. They're always more than happy to share. And what I'm trying to do before I retire is pull together like all 350 of his indexes and make one huge index. Who knows if that'll ever happen. And I just want to finish up here that Frederick County Public Library on June 13th, I gave you a flyer, a brack card about barnstormers, would be part of this Democracy Live TED Talk that's coming out of the American Library Association. I don't know which Virginia libraries were chosen, but we were chosen. So it's a day long of TEDs. These are occurring, I think, in Independence Hall. And then they're being broadcast out on TED. If you go to the website, you'll find the people talking about democracy and civic engagement. And at the end of the day, there'll be a fascinating panel with the likes of Bruce Thompson from FCC, Jake Wynn from the Tourism Office, and Mary Mannix from the Maryland room. So good to take a look at as well. Thank you so much for having me here today. Sorry, my slides blew up. I could continue to talk even without them, but you don't want to hear it forever. And I'm available. If you ever have any questions, please contact the Maryland room. Email me at mmannix@frederickcountymd.gov or mkmannix@gmail. We are here to help you. So mkmannix@gmail or mmannix@frederickcountymd.gov. Also, if you just go to Frederick County Public Library's website, you can click on the Ask a Librarian. We're more than happy to assist in any way possible. There's not much we won't do for patrons because we want to be loved. And we want to, well, I shouldn't say this here, we want to be your favorite library, but I'll say we want to be your favorite library on the other side of the Potomac. Okay, there's fabulous things here. But do take a look at our website, our Facebook page. We regularly have a wide variety of programs. Some relate to history, some are just kind of fun. The Maryland Room has programs off and on as well. And there's other history things that are done. And all of our branches, well, I want you to come to the Maryland Room. All of our branches do a wide variety of history programming, a whole lot more now than they used to. Unfortunately, our newsletter is such that we don't know what goes on in other branches, but my understanding is things go on. And I know there's a lot of great programming at Brunswick too. And if you haven't ever heard Rick Bell, he'll be at Brunswick sometime soon. If you haven't heard Rick Bell, you really should. So that's my, and Frederick County Landmarks Foundation. If you've never been to Schifferstadt Architectural Museum, which not only is on the National Register, but is one of 2 national landmarks in Frederick County. The other one is the Monocacy Battlefield. It is a Germanic house, as you can see there. We are open during the summer, well, starting in the spring, up until things get cold, because there's not really any good heat in there. For the weekend, it's worth a tour. Also, we have Oktoberfest in October. Any questions? I know that's a lot of kind of stray information all over the place. Thank you for your patience with the PowerPoint. Don't I know you? All right, well, what can I do for you?
I'm curious if you have any resources that would have some lists of towns that no longer exist.
The Gazetteer, Louis Gazetteer should list them if you have a name, and we may, point being, we may. So what I recommend, if there's something particular you're looking for, to contact me.
Okay.
If you're just looking like you want to make a definitive list of towns that no longer exist.
There's a particular town that supposedly an ancestor was born in, and I cannot find, and I think it might be in that area, Pennsylvania, Maryland area.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah, email me, and we'll take a look. We may sometimes be me, but may more often be Maryland. Also, I do have notes here that Ed wanted me to mention, which I forgot to do. Our photocopier scans for free, and you can email things home to yourself.
Right.
That's the best part of that.
Also, we have, I don't know if you guys have in here, we have a memory lab. The memory labs are kind of, all the rage these days in public libraries. Frederick County has had a memory lab for maybe 10 or 15 years, which used to travel around, but now has come to live forever, and it's going to come live in the Maryland Room. When Memory Lab first came up, I kind of kept my distance from it. I knew about it because the woman who wrote the grant was one of my students once. And it's not like, we keep secrets in the library. But sometimes it's surprising how far it is between one branch to another. You don't know what's going on. But it traveled, and that isn't necessarily good for the scanners and the equipment. But now it's come to live permanently in the Maryland Room. I was kind of keeping my distance from it because I don't want people to think that scanning your family photographs is going to preserve them. It's good for access, but it doesn't necessarily mean preservation. But we're there, we're free if you ever need to scan photographs. We also do have a video camera if you want to do an oral history, and we do have many things. Anyway, so we have a memory lab, but more importantly, our photocopier scans, and there's no charge. And you can email it to yourself. Anything else? Yes.
So I wonder if you have any hints for my research.
Sure.
I have family members who basically went from just a little south of Frederick all the way up past Hagerstown. And they lived there around the time that it was Prince George's County, Frederick County.
Oh, they were real early.
Washington
Yeah.
County. So how do I know? I mean, I went to the Maryland Room up in Washington County years ago, and they were like, well, you might have to go to Prince George's County. And I'm like, oh, I'm not driving to Prince George's County for this research. But yeah. So
Do you have, well, we do have some Prince George's County stuff,
okay.
because we're the Maryland Room. So we may have things that could help you in that regards. Have you found any land records for them?
Not the records, but I've found references to the name of their property.
Like their patent name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who did you talk to the Western Maryland? Was Elizabeth still there?
I can't remember.
Email me.
Okay.
And also, come in sometime over there, particularly if you're able to come in on a Wednesday morning, because Maryland's there. And when the best Maryland's fabulous. Derek's fabulous, I'm fabulous, we're all great, all the volunteers are wonderful. But when the things that, like all of our volunteers can do, particularly Maryland, she can sit down for you for 2 hours. Sometimes I can sit down for somebody for 2 hours, but sometimes I can sit down for somebody for 10 minutes and then I have to answer the phone or the director comes in or whatever. But we certainly do have Prince George's County stuff. There's transcribed land records from Prince George's County, or at least indexes, also for Frederick County as well. And also there's the Tracy collection, which, if you're not familiar with it, there was Grace Tracy did Pioneers of Wilmanocracy. Her father, Dr. Tracy, I forget his first name, she was also, they were optometrists. What he did for a good time, and there were several men in Maryland who did this, he went to the state archives and copied deeds just for fun. He'd go down on the bus every Tuesday to do this kind of thing. And then he had all these little index cards. And some of his work then Grace used, along with this other guy, to publish this book, Pioneers of Wilmanocracy. Some of those cards that relate to Washington County are up online, but I can't remember where. We have a sub, Jean Conti, who's the librarian at the Historical Society of Washington County Kinship, which you should go there at some point in time. Mostly with Jean's there, because she's great. Well, whoever's there is going to be great. Carol, who runs it's really good. But those Washington County cards are up somewhere, and those may be relevant to you. But everything he did is at the Historical Society of Carroll County. Mm-hmm. So there's another access point. But point being.
And the online Maryland Library says something like that.
Yeah. So there is Landrec, which is the online, but I really shoot myself. But you can. But Maryland likes to do it. So Maryland could go into the grantor grantee index and look for your people. Thank you.
Unlike blocking out.
Yeah, it's fabulous. We're really lucky in Maryland that the State Archives and the Road Commission and somebody else threw money in this to put that stuff up. It's really, really, really great. So Maryland likes to do this, and not only for us, she's been doing it for the North County African American Survey. She just says she does it for Chris Hott and all of it, which is our big county city cemetery. Mm-hmm. So contact us, okay, and we'll go from there. Okay, go.
We're going on
Wednesday. Or come on up Wednesday, 10 to 12 is what Maryland's there. Next Wednesday.
No.
Oh, that's right. No.
I work Wednesday.
Whenever you can. And we can still help you, but it's good to come when Maryland's going to be there. And she just got back from Scotland, and I don't think she's going anywhere anytime soon. Great. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you so much. Hope to see you at some point in time. Hope to at least hear from you. And I'm delighted to finally be here at the Balch as a speaker. You guys are really, I think, really lucky to have this in your community, but also you're really lucky that we're just like 35 minutes away. So I didn't even go speedily, but thank you so much. And I leave you round cards for the people. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Here. People are welcome to cheat on our library.
Yeah. Bring this together. If one of us rises, we all rise.
Exactly. And maybe someday we'll let Ed send copies, because our copier does scan, but we just don't let you send.
I was a frequent sender. I would just turn it on my name.
Yeah, it's right there. I mean, in Maryland.
Maybe someday. But thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good to keep all of those. Lucky you. And again, thank you all for your patience with my PowerPoint misbehaving.
Yeah. Make sure there's nothing there. I did this comparison.
Now I know why you talk so fast. You're from New Jersey.
Exactly. Occasionally I'll have patrons from like the deep south